Hey, listeners, and welcome to the You Are Epic podcast. This is where we honour the people who've helped build not just our industry, but our communities. I'm Angela Hucker, and I am so glad that you're here. So, I'm taking the time to sit down with people who've been in construction for years, people who've been through the ups, the downs, and everything in between. You're going to hear real stories of resilience, growth, and moments that shaped who they are. This podcast is for those that want to learn more from people who've been walking this path for some time, and they're helping to lift up others and quietly making a difference along the way. It's also to show you that your journey matters and your voice matters. And in case you've forgotten, you are epic. Let's get into it. Today's guest is Jo Farrell, an award-winning construction executive, independent advisor, and the founder of Build Like a Girl. With nearly 3 decades of experience leading major projects, including a nuclear decommissioning program in Lithuania and the Australian War Memorial Southern Entrance Project, Jo has been recognised nationally for her leadership, cultural impact, and commitment to diversity in construction. Named the 2024 ACT Australian of the Year and ACT Woman of the Year, she now splits her time between executive consulting, driving cultural change across the industry, and championing affordable housing as ACT Chair for Housing All Australians. Jo, it's so awesome to finally connect and have you as part of this. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. Such an honor.
Oh, the honor is all mine. So, one thing I always love to ask all of my guests, and especially for someone who's been in the industry as long as you have, how on earth did you get started in this industry?
Oh, look, I think I was always just attracted to it. And even as a kid, just loved Lego, loved building things. Like there was always something that just attracted and interested me. And I always I saw building as being very creative. I
Mm,
think it's something we forget quite often in the industry that it is creative and it's artistry and it's we're doing a job that dates back to when the humans first walked around,
yeah,
building things. It's just a core intrinsic part of who we are as human beings. And so yeah, Mum said I just was absolutely enamored with it. If we drove past building sites, I'd be stuck to the car window. And I recall sort of being fascinated by seeing so many different people doing so many things. And, there would be a building site with nothing, just some fencing. And then in a matter of weeks and months, all of a sudden there was this thing. And
yeah,
I just thought that was the best thing ever.
yeah.
And so yeah, so yeah, always very attracted to it. The only other thing I thought about doing was being a vet, but I fainted at the sight of blood. And so that wasn't going to happen.
No.
So it was building. And so yeah, I was really encouraged by my parents to pursue that. We didn't have any other tradies or builders in the family, so there was no family sort of history of that directly.
Okay.
And I think Mum sort of thought, oh yeah, it'd be good to have someone handy in the house that can fix things. So she was all for it. My dad and my brother are pretty useless on the hammer. So yeah, but it was very quickly apparent to me when I asked to do work experience and was told, well, when I said I want to go to the steelworks and work at the steelworks like all the other guys that were doing, and that was the best way for you to possibly set yourself up to get an apprenticeship. And the careers counsellor said to me, well, why do you want to go to the steelworks? And I said, well, because I want to get an apprenticeship when I finish school. And he said, if you want an apprenticeship, go and be a hairdresser. And so that was my first taste of, hey, this isn't going to be supported by everybody, even though your family are supportive. And then it kind of just rolled on. And every time I started making moves, in that way during school and then straight after school, it was just a shutdown. And so, yeah, it was really hard to get a start.
So, I mean, you would have been, like late teens at that point. How did you kind of
17.
navigate that? Because, like women in the industry, as you've touched on, weren't real common back then. So, how did you navigate that to actually push that door open and get in?
It was really hard. It was, so I finished school. I bombed out of school. I wasn't very good. It wasn't until my early 20s I was diagnosed with dyslexia. And so I had a hard time with maths. I still do. I still get people to check when I use a tape measure. There's ways around certain disabilities that you can
Mm.
navigate that doesn't take away from the fact that you learn in a different way.
Yeah.
And I stress this point a lot to particularly a lot of young women. And given that we have a lot of neurodiversity now coming to the forefront where people are actually saying, hey, I think I need some help with things.
Mm.
In the late 90s when I was in school, it was just I was the dumb kid. I couldn't, get through the mathematics class in the same way. I was flunking out on tests. I mean, my year 11 physics teacher declared that I was the dumbest person in the room because I failed another test. And so you can imagine my self-esteem at that point in time. I disengaged from schoolwork and
Mm.
from anything related to it. And so I sort of, fell out the other side of high school. I didn't get an 8R or a HSC mark to go to university like my other friends. I just got a little red dot on the bottom of my transcript, which essentially means, hey, you were here for a certain period of time, but we're not even going to give you a score because it's so low. And so that was my ending of my school life. And I knew inside that I wasn't dumb. I just knew that I had to learn in different ways. And so there was a bit of already a hurdle and a barrier for me to prove that I could go out into the workforce and work. And so I started applying for jobs, and this, before the days of Seek and internet, which is
Yeah.
showing my age at the time, but I started applying. So, newspaper advertisements, advertisements in actual businesses saying, hey, we want an apprentice. All those sorts of things. So it's dropping your CV off to those businesses, making phone calls. And the rejection was very brutal because it was to your face. It wasn't just an email saying no, thank you. It
Mm.
was people saying they didn't actually want me. And all of the rejections that I got, and I applied for over 150 positions. So these were advertised positions where they wanted someone. It wasn't just me cold calling on businesses asking if they had a spot. It was advertised spots. And, all of the reactions were so similar in terms of, well, we don't employ girls. We don't want girls on site. You're going to be a distraction. Girls aren't strong enough to do this sort of job. So we would never hire you. And it just, every single response was the same time and time again. And no one sort of stopped to even say, well, why don't we give you a go? Or why do you think you're capable of doing this? There was never any, I guess, regard for my opinion and my drive. It was just a shutting it down, slamming the door in the face. And so that's pretty hard in the first instance, particularly when you're 17, you just finished school, you don't know much about life, and getting told we don't want you and you're not good enough, and coming off the back of already the kind of, the
Mm.
experience at school
Mm.
was pretty tough. But, I had good support at home, and my parents were really supportive, in particular my mum. And my mum raised me to say, you can do anything you want, be anything you want to be, but you've got to be willing to work hard. And so I just kept sort of putting myself out there. I was working in a hardware store. It used to be, before it was Bunnings, it used to be Hardware House. So I was working there. Still learning some of the things, like some of the lingo, and I used to follow the traders around and pepper them with questions in the timber yard there. And sort of was still trying to get my head around what the industry looked like. I was working at KFC, I was working in a bar when I started turning 18. I had all these other jobs, but my dream was to start. And I eventually wore down a guy to give me a start. And he said, fine, I'll let you turn up on site. You'll work for nothing for 3 months and we'll see how you go. And there's no guarantees after that. And so I took that and said, fine. And so, yeah, I worked for him 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday, full-time hours. Didn't get paid a cent for 3 months to prove myself. So that was my starting point.
And that's illegal these days. I mean, it was
That's called
illegal back
modern
then.
slavery.
Yeah, well, it is modern slavery. Like it's illegal, but oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So it was and look, that was hard, and the game there with those guys on site was, how uncomfortable can we make you before you go away? And day one, and I tell people this story just because it's ingrained so much, the trauma of it, I think. But day one, I was all excited and thought, this is it, this is the start, and turned up on site. The guys working didn't give me the time of day, and the boss came over and he handed me a shovel and said, I want you to start digging a hole here. And I thought, yeah, no problems. And I said, how big do you want the hole and what's it for? And, and he said, don't ask questions, just start digging and I'll tell you when to stop. So started digging, and I thought, I'll prove how well I can dig this hole. This is a bit of a test, and I'm going to prove to you how well I can do it. So I was digging away. Guys went to smoko, had a bit of a laugh, kicking dirt in the hole while I was in there. Kept digging. Lunchtime passed, kept digging. Got to the afternoon, and I dug this hole that, I kid you not, was about the size of a grave. And I'm standing in this hole, and the boss came over and said, righto, now you can fill it in. And so I filled in this hole before I went home. And I thought, all right, well, that was just day one. And, you sort of expect that these things are going to happen just as a bit of a test. The next day I turned up and he walked over to me and gave me the shovel. And the next day and the next day and the next day. And, then I very quickly realized that, life was going to be hard. They were going to make it a point to prove to me that I couldn't do it. And it was going to be a decision about whether I was going to come back every single day and prove that I could. And I'm not a superhero mentally. It was incredibly jarring. It was emotionally traumatic. I would go home of an afternoon and cry, and mum would say, it's totally your choice. You can walk away from this, or you can go back, but it's your choice about what you want to do with it. And I just kept deciding to go back because I knew if I just got a chance to prove that I was capable enough and this is what I wanted to do, that maybe they would see that. And so it was really hard, that 3 months, all the classic ones, Ange, of, being pushed over in the Portaloo, being locked in the Portaloo. That happened so many times that even they got bored from it. Anyone who's been on a construction site and gone inside a Portaloo in the middle of summer knows exactly what it's like. And to be pushed over and not be allowed to go home and get changed and that was all part of what this was going to be. And so stealing my tools, stealing my lunchbox, all of those things. And so it was extreme. It was incredibly traumatic. I had to make conscious decisions around whether or not I was going to keep putting up with it, knowing the damage it was doing. But there was just a part of me that just honestly started rebelling and thinking, I'm not going to let them get the upper hand with this and see how much it's disturbing me. So I just kept turning up. And after 3 months, the boss actually walked over with some paperwork and said, I still don't think you're going to last in this industry, but I'll sign you up. And so it was, a real battle of wills for a long time.
It's kind of like I see that as challenge accepted. You think I can't? I'll show you I can.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I'll prove you wrong. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just going to get out there and prove you wrong.
But the trauma that's involved with that, like the modern slavery, the bullying, the harassment, like the gender inequity, like all the psychosocial hazards that we have identified now, like you experienced all of that, and that was your introduction to the industry.
And with no protections, and because all the stuff that we know exists now, it didn't really exist then. And if anything, it was if you raised an issue with it, then it was even worse. So acknowledging or trying to highlight or shine light on that sort of behavior was actually a worse outcome for you. So you just put up and shut up.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry that was your experience because I can only imagine, like a late teens and how impactful and traumatic that would have been dealing with that after going through what you experienced with school. And then that's your introduction to the workforce and the industry that you wanted to get into as well. But it is a true testament to who you are as a person and your resilience and your determination. And it's probably what's got you to where you are today. So what I'd love to hear is like how that journey actually looked, because where you are today, you are a strong voice in the industry, you advocate for women, you stand up about all the issues, but you would have only got there as a result of your own experiences as well. And I'd love to understand a bit more about what that journey looks like.
Yeah, so and look, I think in terms of the resilience, I wouldn't have said I had resilience back then, but I had a strong stubborn streak. And so if you ask my mum, if you tell me I can't do something, I'll just go and do. So
Yeah.
I don't think I had any resilience at that point. I think I was a little bit on autopilot, and I think it was just a one foot in front of the other, and just finding those little things. And I think resilience has really built up over time with a lot of those knocks, and so it was definitely the start of building. Um, a lot of resilience that I now have with things, but certainly that's a journey. And I always take pains to point that out, particularly for younger women, to go, you're not going to be fully resilient to all this stuff now. It gets built up over a long period of time. But the journey for me was, I got signed up. I actually started learning properly, started going to TAFE. TAFE, I was the only girl in the class.
Mm.
The female toilets were on the other side of the campus. My teacher constantly criticised me about taking too long because it was a 25-minute round trip to the toilet. On campus as well, because again, they didn't cater for women. Why would they? There weren't any. So,
Mm.
and so, yeah, it was all these kind of little hurdles that were always present. that I think that no one else had really thought about or acknowledged would exist. And so things changed in my about a couple of months into my second year, where the builder I was working for, who did mainly cottage construction, which is what it was called back then, he went under, and I couldn't get employed with anyone else, and so I actually moved to Sydney. And I said to Mum, "Look, I'm going to have to move and find more opportunities there." And so that was a big thing for me. You know, I grew up in a little town called Dapto. It's not known for anything other than greyhound races. And you know, pretty much not much else. And I'd never left. I'd never traveled anywhere.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing. And so I moved to Sydney and went from residential construction to commercial construction. So, you know, working on a site with maybe 20 to 30 people max to working with 250 plus. And, you know, that was a big realization for me, and a big change. And so I was working on multiplex sites and John Holland sites and all of the really big ones, with a commercial facade company as an installer. So we're installing curtain wall and other things. So not just a transition in skills knowledge in terms of from working with timber, but then to working aluminium and glass and all the things that that entailed. And so big learning curve in terms of my actual skill set, but then also then going, wow, there's a lot more people on this site. And again, I'm the only female. And so that sense of loneliness and otherness just became more increased. And I remember walking, and you know, we used to have to get to work because we were working in the city. Parking was horrendous. If you wanted early bird parking, you had to get there at like 5 a.m. And I remember in winter it was really dark, and I was walking towards the site, and there was another guy walking as well with all his tools. And he turned around and said, "Oh, hey, just make sure you don't go down to the basement levels, yeah?" And the basement levels in those high-rise, you know, constructions are where the sheds are set up for change rooms and, you know, different things. And it didn't sort of twig straight away what he was trying to imply. And I sort of looked at him and I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Well, we can't hear you down there." And again, it took a moment for me to understand what he was trying to say to me. And so there was a whole layer, and you know, I was sort of aware that when I was walking to and from site, particularly in winter when we start really early in the dark, finish quite late, that I was aware, you know, walk where the street lights are, you know, stay in lit ways. And I sort of started to think, these guys never think about this. They never have to worry about walking in the dark to a construction site first thing in the morning or late at night. They don't have to worry about going down to the basement levels in case no one can hear what goes on down there. And so started getting really frustrated and angry about this different set of rules that I had to abide by that no one wanted to speak about. And the catalyst for a pretty major event, a turning point, I think, for me in my career, where I started feeling a little bit lost and incredibly lonely when you are othered to that point, with such a large working group and you're the point of difference. It's a really lonely space. And, you know, this particular day, I'd been having dramas navigating the toilet cubicles because, again, there were no female cubicles, there was no female block. It was all just male blocks with urinals and cubicles inside. And I used to have to announce myself and try and go in there without someone exposing themselves to me at the urinal because I thought that was great fun to do. I'd have guys looking through the cracks in the cubicle doors at me while I was trying to use the amenities. But this particular day, a group who'd been giving me a little bit of grief verbally, over previous weeks, decided to corner me in the cubicle while I was in there and start threatening me through the door about all the things they were going to do to me if I decided to come out. I won't go into detail for the sake of your listeners on this, but you can imagine what they were saying. And I just had a complete emotional breakdown in that cubicle and thought, I don't want to do this anymore. This is unsafe and it's dangerous, and I don't want to keep navigating this. It's so incredibly stressful and it's so incredibly upsetting. And they clearly don't want me here, so I don't want to be in this environment anymore. And so that was a breaking point for me, stuck in this toilet cubicle. What was even more frustrating and upsetting was I knew that there were other guys coming into that toilet cubicle using the urinals and the cubicles next to me who were seeing and hearing what was going on. I was 19 by that stage. So, you know, what was going through their minds where they thought, well, this is not my problem. I'll just stay out of this because, you know, I don't want to get involved. And this went on for I was stuck in there for about 40 minutes, and they thought it was great fun. And I, you know, was having a panic attack. I was in, you know, all sorts, didn't know what to do, was weighing up in my head going, well, if I do open the door, how bad is it going to be? What are they actually going to do? What am I, you know? So I'm weighing up what my options were, which my options were very few at that point in time. And then all of a sudden, there was this big kerfuffle and some yelling and shouting and, you know, a bit of push and shove. And then I heard a guy turn around and say, "Joe, it's okay, you can come out." And he was a construction manager. He was this little Welshman with red hair. And he just looked at me and he said, I had no idea this was going on. And I'm so sorry because I should have. I should have known about this. I should have realised this, but this isn't going to happen again. So he removed those guys off site. They were banned from all the sites he worked for. And he then called everybody together and had a chat. And what he said with this was pretty straightforward and just said, look, we're just people who are coming here to do a job and we need to look after each other. And it's not about, where you're from or who you are or anything like that. We're just people coming to do a job. Let's look after each other. And he said, and if you don't want to do that, if you want to treat people differently, there's the door, there's the gate. Just leave. And he didn't talk about gender. He didn't talk about any special treatment for me. He didn't say that I needed anything specific, but he just made it super clear that there was to be no point of difference. And what I take pains when I speak about people, when I tell them this story is, who were you in that story? Were you the people outside the door threatening a 19-year-old girl? Were you the people walking in and out at that point in time, hearing it and doing absolutely nothing? Or were you Jeff, who's still one of my best mates today? I call him Uncle Jeff, who was the first man in over 2 years to stand up for me in construction.
Mm.
And when you ask people this, and if they're really honest, they're in the second group predominantly of people who walk past and witness this stuff and say nothing. And I've been in that second group over the course of the years of time in the industry where I've gone, hey, that's not my fight, or yeah, that joke was a bit inappropriate, but I'm not going to call it now because it'll cause dramas. We have all been in that second group, if we're honest with ourselves. But that's the culture issue then and there. The minority group standing outside the door, 100%, they're the issue, but they're not the majority. They're a much smaller group who are very loud and very active. The much larger group is group number 2 who walk past and don't do anything. But for me, having a man advocate for me in that time of absolute crisis was a complete turning point for me. And knowing that I had his backing, knowing that I was able to come to work and then and things started improving from that point on. And that gave me a level of confidence I've never had before. That also allowed me to actually do my job without having to think about all of those other things that existed in the back of my mind around my personal safety and how to navigate the space. So I was actually able to thrive, and I progressed really quickly. I became a leading hand really quickly. I finished my qualification. I was then asked to do a project management, become a trainee project manager with the facade company that employed us as subbies. So I was then put through a training program with them as part of that. That then, opened my eyes to unequal pay, and having to challenge my bosses a few years after being in that job around being paid a third of what my peers are being paid, even though I was doing triple the work. And again, that was a really hard thing for me to do, navigating a white collar space and having conversations with people in power and having that power dynamic. And when you're, a young project manager who has come from where I've come from, sitting in a room with 3 directors who all happen to be older white males, who own the company, advocating for myself with pay. And the only reason I was able to do that was because at that point in time, I had met Alison Myrams, who had become my mentor, winning the professional lottery in like a mentor matchup.
Yeah, I reckon.
Who basically made me go in there fully armed with everything I needed to. But her words to me were, if you're not going to value yourself, if you're not going to advocate for yourself, then why would anyone else? And sent me in there with what I wanted to be paid and also a resignation letter and said, make sure you're prepared to put both on the table when needed. As it turns out, they told me I should be grateful for my job. And the conversation went south pretty quickly. And so the resignation letter got slid across the table. But I walked out of that, and a few weeks later, walked into a job as an operations manager for a steel company, getting paid more than what I would have gotten paid previously if I'd matched the other guys. And so there were these key moments for me stepping through where I had to step up, I had to back myself and value myself and be prepared to really strongly advocate. But I also had some awesome people in my corner who I could trust were there to support. They weren't going to fix the problem for me, but they were going to prop me up in those moments where I didn't believe in myself enough, and they were going to give me that little bit extra that I needed. And so, it went on. And from running an operations company a structural steel company in Sydney doing, we did all the underpinning work on Pitt Street Mall, and we did airport extensions, like huge jobs. But then I ended up going overseas because I just got, I guess, a bit bored with kind of running against all the things I was running against in Sydney, being stuck in the same place, feeling like I was still fighting for a position. And I also had a pretty major health scare, which landed me in hospital and also was pretty life-changing for me as well. So it made me sort of reflect for a moment and go, hey, guess what? You're now 30. You spent the past, sort of 11 years, 12 years proving yourself. You haven't traveled anywhere other than Sydney, haven't seen anything, all your mates have gone overseas, you haven't, like, what's going on? And
Yeah.
so yeah, ended up overseas in Lithuania, and that's a whole series in and of itself, that story, Ange.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then came back to Canberra, and then yeah, all the stuff happened with Kane and Build Like a Girl since then. So it's been a journey.
Wow. What a journey. Honestly, that's just incredible. And what I'd love to hear is, how what your experiences have been and how that's led you to form Build Like a Girl and the people that you're supporting as a result of that.
So Build Like a Girl had been swimming around in my mind for about a decade before I sort of really knuckled down and started it. And really born out of, what did I need when I was younger, and how can I create that
Mm.
for women now? And so I sort of say that Build Like a Girl is exactly what I needed when I was an apprentice. Just knowing that someone will be on the end of a text message or a phone line
Mm.
to answer or message me back when things went really pear-shaped, or when I was in those states of confusion or abject loneliness.
Mm.
And so I didn't really know what Build Like a Girl was going to be. At that point in time, in early 2020, I had accepted the role as general manager of Kane, first female executive within their business of that nature, one of only a handful of general managers in commercial construction doing a similar role, $200 million turnover in the business. So it was a big role, and I had never done that before. And so again, a moment of backing myself in to go, never been a GM before. Can you do it? And in my mind, I'm like, don't know, but we'll give it a crack, which
Yeah.
is pretty much my mindset for everything.
Yeah.
And why I always say to people, when these opportunities come, even if you think you're not ready, you've got to take it anyway,
Yeah.
because it'll just go by. And guess what? Even if you don't think you're ready, you probably are,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And so again, I had really good people around me who are like, Joe, just do it. Just take the role and run with it. What that created was this swell of messages and, inboxes on socials and everything else of other women saying, how did you survive? Because this is my story. And messages from women saying, how did you get to this point? How did you get into this role? Because I can't see a future for me in construction. Women who are tradies saying, I can't deal with this anymore. I want to leave, but tell me why you stay. It was all of these messages from all of these other women and their experiences. And I kid you not, my inbox just went bonkers. And I sat down one weekend and I said to my partner, I need to be able to channel that stuff so there's a place where they can come and ask these questions and we can have these conversations. And I don't know what that looks like, but I've got to create something. And so I literally sat at my dining room table one weekend and just started scribbling down. And that's how Build Like a Girl was born. And at that point, it was sort of, we obviously want to really focus on tradeswomen, just knowing that that's my lived experience and it's what I know
Mm.
really well. But it's just there for anyone who needs help at
Mm.
all, just someone to talk to or bounce ideas off or get information and, get some mentorship with what they need to do. So I didn't really know how to start it. I had some great help from some legal friends and accountant friends to set up as an actual charity, because I said, well, I'm not earning anything from this. It's just got to exist and somehow
Mm.
exist in some way,
Yeah.
because obviously I've got a full-time job, and so all of that was done, and yeah, it was just inundation around, and I was just so furious about hearing these experiences that other women were having, and I thought, it's been over 25 years at that point in time, and nothing has changed. I
Mm.
was I was hearing the same stories and the same experiences, particularly from young women, particularly young tradeswomen, telling stories on site. Scenarios around the Portaloo, scenarios about these other things, and it just brought me straight back to where I'd been when I started, and it was just rage, absolute rage, for me to say, I've got to do something about this. And I know there's lots of people doing lots of stuff. but for my own benefit, for my own probably healing, I need to create something that's going to help people. And so, yeah, it's just been organic in terms of how it started and why it started. But literally, I am the person I needed when I was younger.
I love that. And it's, it gives you that perspective about you've been there, you understand it because you've experienced it, and you could see that gap and you're helping to bridge that gap for others as well.
Yeah, and it's obviously, again, I've got a really strong focus on apprentices and tradeswomen because we are such a low percentage. I mean, I know that it's changing and fully acknowledge that, yes, things are getting better, but I'm also mindful of complacency. And I'm
Mm,
also mindful that whilst we can pat ourselves on the back for a lot of great inroads made, particularly around pipeline and recruitment and encouraging, school age women and other younger women to enter a trade, and we can see the numbers are climbing in every state and territory for that. The retention piece for me and keeping women in their trade to get their qualification is by far the biggest challenge. And it's because of all the things I experienced, that loneliness, the otherness, the bullying, the harassment, the things that still exist have not been addressed in the same way. So whilst we've been working on all of the recruitment and yeah, let's encourage more women to become tradies, this is fantastic. Yes, absolutely. But we haven't fixed the other problem over here. We
mm,
haven't fixed culture. We haven't actually stamped out the types of behavior that I experienced throughout my entire career and now these women are experiencing. So I sort of started wrestling with my conscience and I went into a bit of a hole just after I got announced as the ACT Australian of the Year. And there was a lot of media coverage and a lot of attention and everything else. And whilst I should have been riding a high on that, I actually went into a bit of a situational depression scenario where I
mm,
started really questioning whether I should be doing this because I was getting told about all of these incidences and all of these things happening to women on site. So while everybody's celebrating, yes, how wonderful, build like a girl, and Joe, look what you've done for industry, there was the other side that really no one sees unless you're really closely involved with it. And I sort of went, how can I, in good conscience, encourage women to enter construction and I can't keep them safe?
mm,
And as much as I try and as much as I try and educate employers and be out with the organizations, that they're still having these experiences, which is just breaking them. And, in this, I think probably 2 weeks after I got announced as winning that award, which was completely overwhelming, and I felt very unworthy of it, and I had a lot of imposter syndrome around it. I had 4 incidences in 1 week, and 3 of those were serious sexual harassment incidences, and one was an assault. And the young lady that was assaulted on site is still on workers' comp now. We cannot get her back to the industry because she's so traumatized. We've tried. And when she even drove past a building site, she had a panic attack. And so, as much as, I go around and do public speaking, or if I go to events and people constantly want to come up and tell me how great the industry is now, and it's so much better than it was before, oh, things have changed. And I'm kind of like, they have. In many instances, they have. But here's some real world examples of what has happened in the past 12 to 18 months. And this is only a snapshot.
mm,
So please don't keep telling me that everything's fine because we haven't focused on really fixing the issue.
mm. And you do a tremendous amount of advocacy work and you're engaging with government a fair bit and different bits and pieces. What are you seeing in that regards where there's clearly a missing link because it's not about getting people into the industry, it's about what do you do to keep them safe once you've got them by addressing these behaviors. And a lot of that, there's a lot of these decision makers who don't necessarily come with the lived experience that you've got to be able to make those informed decisions. And from your engagement that you've had from the ground and dealing with the women, and then being in the ACT and you get to engage with government a fair bit, what is that missing link that you're seeing?
I think there's sort of two really key things is one, government will decide on policy before consultation. And so a lot of the things that have come out have been great ideas and the intention is fantastic, but there hasn't been an appropriate level of consultation with people on the ground like yourself and I and other organisations to really understand the crux of the issue and what the solution is. And I feel that sometimes the policy is driven by the fact that ministers need to get up and sometimes tell a good news story in Parliament or be perceived as, hey, we're addressing these issues. But in a lot of instances is fundamentally flawed because it's just not really addressing what the crux of the issue is. So there's a consultation and a listening component that is missing from that. And you the same as I go to many roundtables and other things. I mean, what was really disappointing, and I'll openly say this because I don't care, the Building Women Careers grants. We went through, I don't know how many sessions of roundtables and consultation periods for months before that grant was released. And everything that was given to them in terms of how it had to be done was ignored. And the playing field completely changed. And so why are you wasting our time if you're not going to listen? And you're basically going to end up with the same outcome that you have for the past decade with all of this. So your intention's fantastic. You're going to throw almost $60 million at a problem. Great. That's awesome. But how you do it and how you engage in doing it and what the outcome is going to be, you're not going to get there because you didn't listen at the point in time where we were telling you, you need to do this differently. And so that's when those of us in the industry who have been having these conversations for decades start to get a bit jaded, start to disengage a little bit, because how many times do we have to say it before we're actually going to take the advice on board? And just because it's something you don't want to hear doesn't mean that you shouldn't be actually reflecting on that, dissecting that, having further conversation and actually debating, well, hang on a sec, do we really need to actually listen to this and take this on? So I find that the processes with government departments, whether they're state, territory, federal, it's the same mindset where you just don't want to listen and take on the solutions that we're giving you, but also really intrinsically understand the problem. And I don't expect someone who's a policy advisor, who has never stepped foot on a construction site, who has never swung a hammer a day in their life, doesn't know one end of a nail gun to the other. I don't expect you to know the ins and outs of it, but I expect you to listen to me when I give you that feedback and to take it seriously and not gloss over it. Because if you've already got a thought in your head that, well, we're going to go this way anyway, don't waste my time. Because I'm still going to keep going over here fixing the industry with or without you. But it's you're not listening. And the BWC grant, prime example, that was just ridiculous what ended up coming out of that in terms of the criteria, what we had to meet, telling us we had to actually be tethered to union organizations and other things. I mean, my goodness, like, in what world did you think that that was actually going to be successful in terms of what it is? And the organizations who were granted the money, I'm sure are going to do wonderful things, but not in the way that they originally intended and not with the same efficacy that we all thought we would be able to produce. And so, I've given some pretty strong feedback on that process. Even trying to give them feedback, even trying to engage them through that process was incredibly difficult. So, I mean, if you're a government, if you listen to this, like, actually engage with us on an appropriate level and actually listen to what we're saying. So I think, that's a big part of it, is that the consultation, it isn't true consultation. It's lip service. And that is why we don't get the outcome and the change. But I think, industry are part of the problem as well, in terms of we want to whinge and complain about everything. And we have done, the entire time I've been here, but then we don't actually want to change what's going on. And so, as businesses, I think we need to have a bit of a reckoning. And, you don't get to, I was always taught, my mum ran this home, you don't get to whinge and do nothing. If you're going to whinge, do something, otherwise shut up.
Yeah.
So you don't get both ways, right? And I find industry, we want to, oh, we can't find good people. Oh, we've got a skill shortage. Oh, we can't do this. Well, what are you doing about it then? Because standing there talking about the same thing for the past 10 years doesn't actually change. And guess what? You're part of the problem, because you won't actually implement the types of processes within your business that stamps out sexual harassment. You won't engage in training. You won't actually, have pretty severe penalties, and repercussions for people who behave in a certain way. And then you wonder why you can't keep your team, and particularly for females in your business. You have no pathway for women into leadership, but you expect women to somehow get there and go, oh, we don't have representation at these levels. Well, you've never given them the opportunity. So, I think there's two real issues there where we need to fundamentally reflect and go, are we serious about fixing these problems? And if so, let's engage with the right people, the likes of yourself, the likes of me, the likes of others that we know. But I mean, here in the ACT, I must say, Jacqueline Agius, as Commissioner of WorkSafe ACT, has been incredibly courageous with pushing psychosocial and sexual assault as a notifiable incident here. She's the first jurisdiction to do it. And I think that that is a very, very powerful statement around having severe penalties and infringements and consequences for businesses that are creating unsafe work environments. And it must be treated in terms of a risk assessment and a investigation in terms of something happening as an incident in the exact same way as any other notifiable incident. So I want to see other states and territories adopt that and start being a little bit braver with their approach and actually start putting, penalties in place for businesses that don't start making our sites safer. It's the only thing that's going to work.
And I know that, and that's absolutely right, because it starts with the regulator, because unless they're out there actually enforcing things,
Yep,
nothing's going to change as well. So you've got to be
yep,
able to hold these businesses accountable and the
yep.
behaviours of the individuals at those businesses accountable as well. But I know that you also just had a recent example of being at a round table with a government agency talking about the residential industry, and would love to hear your thoughts about that, because it's again an example of that disconnect of what people are thinking and what the reality actually is as well.
Yeah, so the National Housing Accord is a hot topic, and affordable housing and homelessness is a hot topic. So, as one of the other hats I wear, I'm chair of Housing All Australians in the ACT, which is a not-for-profit organisation that seeks to engage industry and government and a whole bunch of players. And we essentially act as pro bono project managers to bring projects to life for others. So, an example of one of the ones in Sydney is there was an ex-retirement home that was vacant. That Housing All Australians said, right, we'll pull in, this developer, this builder, these people, these suppliers to do pro bono work, convert that into housing, and then they located a provider, which I forget exactly which one it is, but say it's like Vinnie's or Salvo's, to then actually run that service. And so the hot topic at the moment is homelessness, as it should be, and affordable housing, as it should be, and essentially for essential workers in terms of they can't afford to actually get into the housing market. So the most essential people in our ecosystem to make our communities and societies thrive can't buy a house. So take that a step back, and all of a sudden everybody starts using the political football to go, well, even if we created the environment where you could build all these houses, we don't have enough skilled trades. Okay. So to skilled trades means you're qualified. It doesn't mean you're a first year apprentice or a second year or third year. A skilled trade is a qualified tradesperson who has completed their qualification and has a license of some sort, depending on the state and territory jurisdiction. So we use this political football in terms of going, well, we need to focus on getting more skilled tradespeople because we don't have enough. We need to build all these houses. Here are the two fundamental issues that are facing us at the moment, which is considered a national crisis. It's in the news almost every single day. And for some reason, we can't seem to solve that. And so I sat in some meetings, some roundtable meetings earlier this year with all of the players, unions, peak body organisations like MBA, HIA, training organisations, GTOs and RTOs, pretty much every person that's got a stake in this. And looked at these presentation slides that brought up the National Housing Accord targets in every state and territory. So what we're building now versus what we need to build by 2030, which is 5 years away, 4.5 years away. And then what the issues were with that. And it kept getting bandied around like a political football, but we don't have the skilled tradespeople. And I'm like, well, okay, number one, in the ACT, we absolutely do. At the moment, we don't have enough work. So we have more builders than work. So it's not an issue for us. So if we take one of the biggest states and territories, say Vic or Sydney, where you've got a big disparity. So you're currently building this many houses and you need to build this many in the next 4.5 years. So you would suggest that there's probably, yes, a skill shortage relevant to that. But in none of this conversation was there the alignment or awareness that residential building, and even medium density, which sometimes steps into the commercial sphere, has no relationship whatsoever with commercial construction and all of the levers that get pulled in the Culture and Construction Standard, John Davies and the Construction Federation Association, like all of those things predominantly relate to tier one sphere commercial building. So they were relating, there's a mystery guest, they were relating all of the levers that they wanted to pull around gender on the tender, legislation changes, regulation changes, all those things that was solely sitting in a tier one commercial space and trying to relate that back to a residential housing space about building houses in greenfield sites. And so there was a disconnect automatically on data and what it actually meant. And then the other thing is going, okay, so if we've got 168,000 people, this is their stat that leave construction every year for various reasons, mostly inflexibility, mental health reasons, all of those other things that we know quite well. And to backfill those, we currently think we can only hit around 100,000 of a replacement. So we need to top that up, and we believe that women are a big component of topping up that figure. So we need about 50,000 women to actually now get involved with getting skilled trades for the housing accord. So if you start sort of putting all those pieces together and you go, okay, so 50,000 women. So if we were to start 50,000 women tomorrow in an apprenticeship, and I know it's a ridiculous thing to say, but run with me on it. But our current dropout rate for first-year female apprentices is 72%. So to top that figure up year on year to get to a qualification in 4 years, qualified females, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, all the trades that we need, you are talking hundreds of thousands of enrolments over the next few years to even try and get them qualified to that point. And there's no awareness from the consulting companies that federal government engages for this. No real sort of drilling down into, well, how will we even do that and what does that investment look like? Because government forks out about between $26,000 and $48,000 per apprentice per year. That's a government cost with subsidies and other things to employers, as well as the employer cost, right? So you're talking hundreds of thousands of people, most of which are going to drop out at various stages to try and get to this 50,000 number in 4 years. That is a massive investment dollar-wise. And it's not a good one. Any person that sort of is like a financial forecaster will be like, well, that's a poor investment if you have a 72% loss year on year. And no one wants to admit this and acknowledge this, even though the 72% dropout rate is a due statistic. That's their own federal department, another department telling them this. So you've got all these federal departments with all this data saying all these things, and you don't have anyone that can connect the dots in terms of going, it fundamentally comes back to fixing the culture issue to get them to stay so we don't end up churning and burning through hundreds of thousands of people to try and get through this number. And that's looming on us, right? The housing accord is in 2030. We have to achieve these, 1.2 million homes. We're already behind. I mean, the ACT is monumentally behind. So we go to these meetings and we have these conversations and you point out the obvious and then it all just goes quiet. So nothing else has been said since that meeting in March. So are you doing anything about it? Did you listen? No one's reached out to me to say, hey, Joe, can you maybe break this down for us and talk a little bit more about how we can fix this? Nothing. So are you really serious about fixing the issue as a government? Do you actually want to address the root causes of the issue? And if so, reach out to people like me and you to fix it? Or is it just going to be the churn and burn and we're going to be sitting here in another 10 years' time talking about the exact same thing? And meanwhile, homelessness is going to get worse. People are going to be more in the rental market. We're going to have a complete imbalance in terms of economic society structure with the people who have the haves and the people who are the have-nots, right? And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse because we aren't able to have our opinions and our lived experience and our knowledge taken seriously by people who really should take it seriously.
And the thing is our knowledge and lived experience is something that you can't Google. It's not something you can get from secondary research.
Right. And it's that thing also that if we impart all this knowledge to you and we take our time that we never get paid for. I mean, all these roundtables that we go to, we donate our time. So we sit there for an entire day. All the public servants are getting paid, the consultants are getting paid. But all the people invited into the room to impart all of their knowledge, all their experience, all of their ideas and solutions, we do that out of the goodness of our heart because we want to see change. But, hey, government, don't you think that we get a little bit tired of doing it after we've done it for so long and nothing changes? And then you sort of, you get other ones that come. I mean, there's another roundtable coming up in the next couple of weeks. And it's like, what am I doing this for? I'm just going to tell you the same thing I told you 2 years ago. We're still in the same place. And so, I think, getting back to what you said in terms of like, what is the issue? You're not listening to us. That's the issue.
So what would you like to see moving forward?
Set up a task force that is not full of public servants. I think you need a federal task force to multiple things, right? This would be my perfect world wish list. So get an industry task force with representation, much like they do like with Fair Work Advisory and other things. So they have a union representation, they have peak body representation, and then they have actual people with real like subject matter experts like yourself and I to come in, and we set that up. And so instead of paying all these consultant companies that sit behind a desk all day, get some people who've actually got some steel caps and actually out at the coalface day in, day out. And as a
Mm.
collective, we can table all of our input, all of our data, everything that we see happening out there. Within that, I want to see a couple of things. I want to see licensing come back into force for every trade. So whether you're a carpenter, plumber, electrician, painter, plasterer, whatever it is, out of the listed trades that we have from a VAT sector, I want licensing to be federally mandated in every state and territory. So just because you're in New South Wales and need a roofing license, but you can come into the ACT and not have one. So I could actually start a roofing business tomorrow, and I would be crap at roofing and roof plumbing, but I could do that and I don't need a license. But if I cross over the border into New South Wales, I do. So let's first and foremost, and the reason for this and the reason I advocate this is we all complain about building quality. So let's bring quality back in through training.
Mm.
That invigorates the training sector. And so we get a streamlining through state and territory that everybody, no matter where they go cross border, has the same licensing and qualification, the same skill set, and the same, certifications in terms of what they have to do. Automatically, that will step up quality and brings us all back to an indentured apprenticeship for 4 years. Secondary to that, we want to see the same mandate, federal mandate, similar to what ACT have done in terms of notifiable incident for psychosocial and sexual assault. We want that in every state and territory. It's not at the moment. New South Wales are tossing it up, going, yeah, we think we're going to bring it in. Victoria going, oh, we think it's a bit much. We're not sure. So the MBA got industry together and built the Respect Code, which is a nice to have industry-led initiative that has no teeth. So instead of everybody doing their own thing in terms of legislation and regulation when it comes to behaviour, let's just have that at a federal level that gets pushed down. And the way that we do that is by the Respect at Work Commission, which is a Human Rights Commission mandated report, gets driven down in every state and territory, and we all have to abide by it. So if someone gets sexually harassed on your building site, you didn't have a risk assessment for it, you didn't train appropriately and make it clear what the consequences were, you're going to get an infringement, a prohibition notice in the exact same way as anywhere else. So it's a financial penalty. It's going to cost you a hell of a lot of money. You won't be doing it again. You're going to start stamping things out pretty quickly. If you have some rogue person on your site harassing someone, and it stops your entire job until it's investigated thoroughly.
Mm.
So let's actually do that in every state and territory instead of picking and choosing what people want to do in terms of enforcement. So all of a sudden we have licensing quality, we have legislation that backs it up, and then we can actually then start doing the training components and making sure that we have mandatory frameworks around the types of training that people have to do. And I know that it's a highly regulated industry and people get training fatigue. Doesn't matter. We haven't changed in 30 years. Get over it. So until people start to realize how they have to behave and there's real world consequences in terms of not towing the line, that's what we need to do. But it needs to be driven by an industry-led task force where we have the solutions, we know what needs to be done. You just provide the framework and the funding for us to do it, and it'll be much cheaper than all this crap you've been trying to do for the past decade.
I love it. I'm on board. You and I will lead it.
Well, it's sitting there.
It's
and
it's the
sitting
missing
there.
piece.
Correct. But it's about, mandating from a federal level into every state and territory means there's no grey. We're all playing by the same rules. And it also creates a really equitable tendering field as well.
Yeah.
No one's bullshitting anymore about what they're putting in tenders and the things they're going to do and everything else. You will be doing this. These are the bare minimum legislative requirements. All the other nice to haves, sure, go to town on that and make sure you follow through because we're going to audit it. But these things are the core. You don't have these, you don't play in our world. At the moment, it's too disjointed and it's too dysfunctional.
And that's the thing. It's, it's even within a state, if you go from company to company to company, there's all different standards for everywhere. So you can work in the same state and be working to different rules for different companies. So it doesn't have a minimum standard for the industry, which is something that I've also been advocating for a few years as well. So I'm totally on board with that. So we need to have a level playing field, and then, there should be, for people doing the extra nice to have things, then they get recognised through a tender process as well, whether it's extra points through an evaluation or whatever. So,
but there's got to be, the gender on the tender, and again, great intention, Love the fact it's being driven out. Love that the culture standard is being driven out now through New South Wales, ACT, and Victoria in terms of making it something you have to comply with and having it as a weighted criteria. And that you have to demonstrate how you're going to meet it. So participation of women on site and non-binary people on site, work flexibility, health and well-being. That's great. But we all know that we say whatever we like in tenders to win a job, and then we backtrack out of that when the money starts getting squeezed and things go sideways. That can't be what that is. If you make a commitment at tender, that commitment is audited and tracked all the way through the project to make
Mm.
sure you're actually abiding by that. And that there's penalties with that as well. So if you made a commitment with this is how many female apprentices we're going to employ for the lifetime of this job, and you've said 10 and you only have two, well, guess what? There's going to be a penalty to that. In
Mm.
much the same way as, work flexibility. And if you're, saying certain things about flexibility that your team have on that job or within that organization while they perform that project, and you backtrack on that and start changing the rules, again, there's penalties with that. It's got to be audited in the same way as secure local jobs, Indigenous participation, other requirements, because right now people are saying whatever they like. And you and I both work with lots of companies providing tender support. And, they talk a good game at the beginning in terms of, oh, we want
Yeah.
this and we want to do this and want to do this, and you never hear from them again. And you know
Yeah.
for a fact that they've won the job and they never had any intention of doing
No.
any of those things.
No.
And so it's how are you going to manage that? Because you've taken it at face value. There's a bit of an honesty system to go, oh, look, this person's going to do all this stuff. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's give them a job.
Yeah.
Doesn't come to fruition. Now, the project office is actually asking the question. And so that's where it starts to fall down. And again, that's where mandating it, instead of having a nice to have in a tender process, mandating it all the way through the project for the
Yeah.
lifetime of the project and having a deliverable and a KPI at the end of that to say, well, how'd you go?
Mm.
So whether there's bonus structure payments around that, within that, I know that sends everyone into a flurry because we're in such a highly competitive environment and financially we're all strained. But there's got to be, the people who are doing the right thing, the people who do engage us and then do invest are the ones who are also getting put into the same playing field as the people who are not. And that's not fair.
Mm. I agree. I agree. And it's something that needs to continue through the supply chain because the tier ones are doing it to win the
Yep.
jobs.
Yeah,
And then when you think about it from a probity perspective with what happens with government tenders, to be able to award that project, well, then where's the accountability that actually then goes down the chain as well? So, and the
100%.
enforcement part. So, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I totally agree. Such valuable information, Joe. You're a wealth of wisdom. So, what I'd love to ask you in closing, and thank you for sharing all of that. What I'd love to ask you in closing is that I always love to tap into people's knowledge and wisdom, and you've shared an extraordinary amount of knowledge and wisdom with us. So, thank you for that. But if you had some knowledge and wisdom that you could help pass on to someone else, and whether that's a young woman who's starting in the industry or something that government needs to hear, where it's just like, man, if there was just someone standing in front of me and I could tell them something, what would Joe's words of wisdom be to them?
Yeah, look, I sort of always get asked to provide sort of worldly advice.
Yes.
And I generally sort of have three pieces of advice. So, number one, it all comes down to I live my life in terms of some key rules and fundamentals. So, effort and reward, and decisions and consequences. And so, I've learnt the hard way. It hasn't all been sunshine and roses for me, and I haven't always been the best version of myself in terms of stepping through construction and some of my behaviors and interactions. And so it's a constant learning curve of not just affecting the environment outside of you, but yourself in terms of how you carry yourself, the interactions you have, the communication that you have, and learning sometimes that, hey, you're not right and you're not the one behaving in the right way here, and actually correcting a lot of those things. So I've done a lot of hard work around, myself and my personal brand and what I represent and what's intrinsically what my values are. I don't always live by them. I sometimes let myself and others down, but I do my best to always bring myself back to that. But for me, I always say, particularly to apprentices and young tradeswomen, life is effort and reward based. If you are willing to put in the effort
Mm.
and to go that extra step and to really sort of push yourself out of that comfort zone, you will get the reward. And it's all based on you. And it's the same as mentoring and mentee relationships. As a mentee, it's all on you. You'll get the absolute most out of that relationship if you put the effort in. If you don't, it'll be a waste of time. But effort and reward, having the mindset that no one's going to hand you stuff. It's just
Mm,
not how life is, and particularly not now. It's so competitive. There's a lot
mm,
going on out there. So you need to put the effort into yourself and into what you're doing, and you will see the reward. Also, decisions and consequences. You make a good decision, there's a good consequence, happy days. You make a bad one, don't blame anyone else for the bad consequence. And I've got many, many examples where I've did that throughout my life and
mm,
wanted to try and blame other people for it. And intrinsically, it came back to me
yeah,
making a poor decision at that point in time. I've just got to learn from it and move on, stop laying blame at other people's feet. So it's really important to understand like, no one's going to do this for you. You've got to drive this. But if you do it in the right way, and if people can see you're putting effort in yourself and you're making the effort and doing the hard work, they will come on board and come along for the ride and they'll support you. And that's been really important for me in terms of the people I've had around me. Second thing is take the opportunity. We spoke about it before.
mm,
If a promotion, a job offer, a new job, some sort of thing comes up, or even if it's something in a volunteer base that might expose you to some really great networking, take the opportunity. Even if you think you're not ready for that big jump or what it is, someone else thinks you're ready, or the universe thinks you're ready. Don't question it. Jump
yeah,
and figure it out later. Every time I stepped into a new role, whether I was a project manager, an operations manager, a general manager, I was never fully ready for that. And I didn't know if I could do it, but I did it anyway. And I figured it out afterwards. And I
mm,
always had the right people around me to ask questions. And I can tell you there was a flurry of phone calls and text messages to people when I became a GM and went, I don't know what I'm doing right now. Can you coach me through this? They're like, yep, do this, do this, do this.
yeah,
So as long as you've got the right network, you can lean on that support to
yeah,
fill some of those gaps. But if you miss that opportunity, it may never come again. And
yeah.
so, when I got offered a job in Lithuania, I took it. Didn't even know where the country was. I just said yes. There was, and I don't necessarily advocate for that extreme level of doing it, but just always just grab hold of it and run with it. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You fail, so what? Start again.
You learn.
It just, it's just failing's part of life. Get used to it. I fail all the time. And the last thing is your voice matters. Your voice matters, and your
Mm,
opinion matters, and your story matters. And as someone who gets to share their story a lot and see the impact and the connection that makes, and so many young women come up and go, I thought it was just me who felt like this, and now I feel seen. We have to share our stories. They're so incredibly powerful. And I think that we really have to keep, bringing other women with us. We have to stop being so competitive. We need to support each other more, and we need to
mm,
shine a light on those stories. And every opportunity I get to speak, I always talk about other organizations and other people in rooms full of hundreds of people and say, you need to follow this person and this person and this person. It's about all of us because none of us succeed. If only one of us is up there and the rest are all here. So
yeah.
if we don't start linking arms and actually dragging ourselves forward together, we're never going to get there. And I think we really need to get over ourselves with that. And really, if we're going to say we're women supporting women, then let's actually do it properly. And you're a great advocate for this, and you live and breathe that. I've never seen anything different with it. And you're very honest in terms of that approach. And it's just so fundamentally important to understand what that means. But it's yeah, like just it's backing yourself and backing others that share your values is really,
Mm,
really critical.
I agree. And thank you so much. And thank you for giving us your time and sharing your story
No,
and
pleasure.
your
Thank you for having
wisdom.
me.
And it's been so awesome to hear about your journey and, what you've learnt through the years and just tap into your wisdom. And thank you so much for everything you're doing for this industry, Joe. Like, it's incredible. You really are making a difference. You're making a difference to all the women that you're supporting through all the different avenues that you're doing it. Some of it obviously isn't seen and some of it isn't always obvious at the very beginning, but, I have no doubt that you're having such a huge impact for so many people across the country. And, I personally just want to thank you for everything that you're doing to help make this industry better. We really
Oh, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
No, I appreciate you too, Ange. I don't think anyone really understands what you do either and how much of your own personal time and funding and input goes into all the stuff that you do as well. And so yeah, it's a bit of a thankless job sometimes and it can hit you pretty hard and feel like a lonely space. But I mean, yeah, I'll leave you with the analogy I always live by is have you heard the starfish story?
Please share.
And you need this as much as I need it some days. So, there's a woman walking along a beach and there's thousands of starfish that have washed up on the beach in a storm. And she's picking them up and throwing them back in the water. And a guy walks over to her and he's like, there's no way in the world you can throw all these back. And she said, yeah, I know. And he said, well, you're not going to save all of them. And she said, yeah, I know, but I saved that one and I saved that one and I saved that one. And it's really, really important because you can't always fix all the things and help all the people. But even just one, even changing the trajectory, helping one person,
Yeah.
we have no idea the massive effect
Yeah.
that that can have. And so, yeah, try and remember that yourself because I know that, you have the hard times as much as I do. And we sometimes question why we're even doing this because
Yeah.
we could go off and probably, earn bucket loads more money doing something else
Yeah.
and selling our
Yeah.
soul. But the starfish, and it's exactly that. Like, I don't care if it's one person or 10 people or a
Yeah.
million people I help, it's about the individual and that change, and that's sometimes how it ripples through.
Yeah, and that's perfect, and that beautifully sums it up because I go, as long as I can just help one person every day, and that ripple effect of how that can go out,
Yeah,
because their circle of influence is 10 people, and then they're 10 people, and then that
yeah,
just expands as it goes on. So, and
yeah,
that's what drives me every day is that, as long as I can just, say one good thing to one person every day, that could be the thing that
yeah,
makes me get through the day as well. So, um,
100%.
that's beautiful. But thank you so much, Joe. We really appreciate everything that you're doing and your knowledge and giving us your time.
No, pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Ange.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. I hope this conversation gave you something that you can take with you, whether it be a little bit of insight, inspiration, or maybe just a reminder that you're not alone. If it resonated with you, please share because we're better when we help build each other up. And remember that your experience, your story, and your journey, it all matters more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay connected, and never forget you are epic.